we will now talk about sumps. However, let's take that up in part 2 of this episode. Hey, what's up guys? Abhishek here from AV Studio. Now, a lot of people would just say, oh well, just go for a sump. But is it really necessary to go for a sump all the time, every time? I don't know, probably not, because you would obviously want a sump if you have a really big tank. If you have a smaller tank, like a 3 feet or 4 feet tank, I'm not too sure whether you would need a sump in that case. Again, it would also depend on the kind of bioload in your tank. If you have a stingray of this size, then they do release a lot of ammonia, is what everyone says. Freshwater stingrays release a lot of ammonia. And this big guy here must be releasing a lot of ammonia. So to break down that ammonia, to counter that ammonia, you probably want more filter media. And that's exactly what one of the advantages of a sump is. It's big. Obviously, a sump is nothing but another tank under your main tank. And you can actually throw in a lot of media. You can customize it the way you want to. So you could have, say, 4 chambers. You could stuff the first 2 chambers with a lot of these mechanical media, which is your lot of layers of sponges, and then you could go with a whole lot of biological media and throw in a little of chemical media in one of the chambers. So you do have a lot of room to play with when you have a sump, and obviously the more the media, the better it would clear or keep the water conditions really good. And I'm sure you know the saying that there's no filtration which is overfiltration. More the filtration, better it is. That's one of the advantages of a sump. The other advantage of a sump that I feel personally is that there's a lot of things that we keep in our fish tank. For example, you could keep a heater. We've spoken about using lights, like heavy lights for tanning and all of those. I spoke in one of my older videos where if you have too much of light in the tank, that would mean that the water may turn green. So one of the things that you want to keep in there in your fish tank to ensure that the water doesn't turn green so often or not so fast is some sort of a UV light, which will take care of the algae. So you keep all of these things inside the tank, your main display tank. Now, one of the advantages of having a sump is all of these things can actually go into the sump. So you can have your heater in the sump, you could have your UV light somewhere in the sump, and so you could actually keep all of these things inside the sump, and you could have only what you want in the display tank, and you don't really have to. In fact, if you see, there's absolutely nothing in my tank at the moment. If you see, there's really nothing. There are lights, of course, but there are nothing else. That's simply because it's running on a sump, and everything that I have is inside the sump. So that's a bit of an advantage. Also, because your return water is at a certain height, because it's generally not put under the water because there could be other problems with that. So it's generally above the water, which means there's a lot of water agitation. The advantage of the water agitation is the fact that it's going to create a lot of oxygen in the water. Of course, there's a disadvantage. There would be evaporation and all of those things. Also, what you could do in a sump is that the return pump is something that you can choose. The speed at which water will be churning into your tank or will be moving out and back into your tank is something that you can decide. You could go for a really, really high powered submersible pump, which would have a lot of gallons per hour movement in your tank. Generally, people say that the capacity of the pump in case of a sump and in case of a canister filter, the capacity of the canister filter power head should at least be 3 times the size of your tank. So your water should be churning or going through the filtration process at least 3 times an hour. But you could actually put in a pump in there that would do a lot more. For example, this tank of mine would have approximately about 500 to 550 liters of water. But the submersible pump that I put in there is a 2500 liters per hour, which means it's churning the water 5 times every hour, which just keeps the water clearer and cleaner, and it's good for our arowanas, and of course because there's a stingray, so it just works well. So these are some of the advantages of having a sump over a canister filter. On the flip side, there are certain disadvantages of a sump. The obvious one is the fact that it's going to take up a lot of space, so you better have some space under your fish tank, otherwise you will not be able to have a sump. That's one of the things. The other thing is the plumbing. The plumbing that needs to be done, the pipes that bring the water from the tank into the sump and then back from the sump into the tank. A lot of plumbing has to be done because sumps are overflow systems, which means you'll need to drill a hole into the tank. There are of course certain hang-on overflow systems, but then people just wouldn't want to take the pain of doing all of those. One of the ways, the easiest way to do it is actually drill a hole. Of course, not really easy, because if you've bought an old tank, then you can't really drill it unless you get a glass cutter and a driller. And if you have toughened glass, then God help you, that's not going to happen. So you got to drill the hole, and an elaborate plumbing system and all of that has to be created. So that kind of puts off a lot of people, and they tend to not create a sump. The other thing that I've noticed is, like I mentioned, because the water falls from a certain height, so there's a lot of agitation of water and a lot of water splashing, which results in a lot of evaporation in the water. The similar issue you'll find in the sump itself, where you'll have a lot, because it's open surface, so you'll have a lot of water evaporation, which means the water in the final chamber, the last chamber where you have the return pump or the submersible pump, would actually go down, and you have to ensure that the water level doesn't really go below the submersible pump. At the same time, you cannot fill up the sump too much, because if you've had a power cut, which in India we do have, then your sump could overflow. So certain measurements, physics are involved in it, so that's something that you'll have to keep in mind while using a sump. But my personal opinion is the kind of filtration a sump can provide, possibly a canister would probably fall short, because I'm using both. Like I said, I use a Fluval, I use an Eheim, a couple of Eheims rather, and I use a sump as well. The sump just seems to work a little better as far as the conditioning of the water is concerned. So my personal opinion would be that I would just go for a sump. But again, if you do not have a big tank, if you do not have a lot of bioload, if you have a 4 feet tank with just one small arowana in it, 8 inches, 10 inches arowana in the tank, then you probably don't need a sump. However, if you're like me and you want to do the best grooming for your arowana, or at least you want to try doing the best grooming for your arowana, and one of the ways to do that is to keep the water clean, then you probably go for a sump. I prefer a sump, but I'd like to know from you guys, what do you prefer? What do you use today? Do you use a filter? If yes, then what kind? Is it an internal filter, a hang-on filter, an external canister filter, or do you use a sump? And would you like to change from what you're using to something else? For example, if you're using a sump, would you like to move over to a filter, and vice versa, and why? I'd really love to hear your thoughts. And that's all for this video. And I just wanted to tell you guys that if you liked what you saw, then please hit the like button, and if you haven't subscribed to my channel, then please consider subscribing. So that's it for now. Until the next one, thanks for watching. Peace.